I tried to make a funny video and it didn't work out, and I need content for this channel, so let's talk about my experience reading Don Quixote. Now, this won't necessarily be like a review or a discussion, because I read this in almost 3 years ago now, in 2018 during my golden year of reading, and I got a lot to say about this book. It's not going to be as negative as my last one, but I do have some negative points against it. Now, you all know Don Quixote. If you don't, we've all experienced it through cultural osmosis. Pretty much what you heard is pretty much what you get. Don Quixote, old delusional old man, and his fat assistant going through wild travels throughout the Spanish countryside thinking that they're knights. Now, we have to talk about a concept, and that's the concept of being a product of its time. And I never really liked that idea. I feel it's very dismissive when you review a piece of media as that, like, oh, it's a product of its time, you have to take it as that, it's like not that great, and it's like, that just feels lackluster to me, because even if it's a product of its time, even if it's old or something, it can still be very relevant. Like, that doesn't feel like a way to invalidate the work in itself, or it doesn't feel like a proper criticism of it, because even like in medium like films with black and white films or video games like the Atari 600 and stuff like that, there's still a lot of enjoyment, and there's subset of people who stay within that field and love those works. And the same thing with literature. It's like, oh, it's a product of its time, but we're talking about literature that goes back so far back, because that would imply that we're going to be able to dismiss the postmodernists or James Joyce, or like a bunch of other authors in the 1900s years later saying, oh, it's a product of its time. Even stuff that's out of date in the sense like with sci-fi, people still glean enjoyment for that and find relevant themes in that. Just because, like in Star Trek, even though I don't watch it really, this is outdated because now we have cell phones, we even have Bluetooth, so that is technology of our time and it's not even unique or new anymore. There's still a lot of relevant themes in Star Trek. We experience the same conflicts throughout these works, despite the time difference. Like the book Hymn said, Dante's Inferno is still about not being able to get over somebody that you love. That's the whole impetus of the book, and even though it was written like, what was it, 600 years ago, for the 1400s, so like 700 years ago or so, it's still very relevant today, and it's still an experience that us humans have to this day. So human experiences don't go out of date. That being said, Don Quixote is a product of its time. It's technically the first modern novel, but what I mean that it's a product of its time is that I'm not even necessarily talking about the humor or the plot setup, or a little bit of the plot setup, but more so the fact that this is not a book meant to be read the way we read things now. Books nowadays is kind of like an HBO series in the easiest sense. It's a 10-episode season that you can just consume really quickly and you get the next season. Don Quixote is like 90s cartoons. Like, how many seasons are there? Like 18. It's like, and it's episodic, and the storyline doesn't really go anywhere. Like, it's not a continuous storyline, it's just episodes. And so it's like, oh, so imagine if you got a huge box of VHS tapes and just started watching them. If you don't like the humor in it, you're not going to enjoy it too much. Because the thing with Don Quixote has that initial premise, and then each chapter is just a different comedic scene. And it goes through that with both books. And you know, that might not be so bad on its own, but here's the problem. Reading this book is like reading through a goddamn log. So I'm reading Women and Men right now by McElroy, which is, I just found out, this is the biggest single volume book in American literature. And it's just under 1,300 pages. I think you're missing 2 pages for 1,300. And look at the size of this thing. Look how much the dense text is and everything. Here it is compared to Don Quixote. Pretty much the same. However, look at the font in this thing. That is ridiculous. The font is so small. I was like, yo, when I was reading this, I was like, man, I'm such a slow reader. Why am I reading this so slow? And then I realized, like, comparing it to other books, like, oh my god. This thing is a brick. It's a little brick. It is both books. Most people who said they read Don Quixote haven't read both books. I know, because my dad was like, oh, I read Don Quixote. And so my friend Martel was like, oh, I read Don Quixote. I'm like, all 800 pages? Like, oh. And most people, the most famous scene is the tilting against Windmill Scene, because it's like in the first few chapters of the book. There's a lot of other scenes that people don't even talk about. Now, the problem I have with this book also, aside from a few scenes, I didn't find it funny. And a few scenes in an 800-page book, is it necessary to read Don Quixote? If you were talking to me, I'd say, if you're interested, read the first few chapters. If you don't find that immediately funny, it's probably not a book for you, and you don't necessarily have to read it. And if you still want some of that experience, read a collected work of it. Like I'm sure those condensed volumes have just like some of the best segments in the book. and that would be totally suitable because, again, it's just initial setup, bunch of different plot stuff, and the ending. But I'll be fair, there were some funny things. My favorite scene was where he becomes the Knight of Lions, where he puts a lion in a cage that wasn't willing to attack him. The tilting against Windmill Scene was funny, and there was a cool scene near the end of the first book where he meets an actual adventurer, and it's kind of based off Cervantes, because Cervantes was a slave for a while, I think by a Muslim country, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember exactly. So he was a slave for a few years before he wrote this book. He wrote several other books before this, but this is the one that got him famous, and he wrote it at the end of his life. Okay, so that's enough bashing. Let's talk about something really strange that I never really encountered from another book. Even though I'm not a fan of this book is an amazing intertextual and referential piece. This book, even though being the first modern example of a novel, it's almost postmodernist in what it does, in the sense of referencing itself within the text. So it starts off as a found document, stuff like Name of the Rose, House of Leaves, etc. And it's about this man reading the life of Don Quixote. The initial premise is that he reads so much literature that it fries his brain and he thinks he's a knight. Which is amazing because that's kind of the same thing we say about TV. TV will fry your brain. Cervantic Tales fried his brain and made him delusional. Also, other things in the book that are just kind of crazy. In book 2, it's because he makes a lot of mistakes in book 1 that he says the astute reader will notice. I didn't notice, but but he mentions them in book 2, like, oh, here's some inconsistencies, and he fixes them within the plot, and he pokes fun at them within the plot. This book was so popular. Somebody made a fake sequel to this work, and it got published. And Cervantes was not happy. How do I know that? He references that in the book, and he calls him a fraud, he calls it fake, like this is not the real Don Quixote. You have this novel that's referencing other Cervantic tales within it. It has that postmodernist meta-commentary in it, and then there's aspects of outside the novel that come into the play within the novel, like referencing the mistakes, referencing the second work that was fake to it. And you know, this is generally associated with stuff with the 1900s, and this is centuries back. And it's pretty crazy. And also, just like referencing stuff like his time as a slave, that last explorer in there, you can really tell it's like another aspect of Cervantes. Like Don Quixote kind of embodies like the failure of himself in a sense, and the other Cervantic knight who has a lady who came from that Arab country and who escaped slavery. And it's like, oh, this is like both sides of the author right here. And they're both kind of respecting each other. It's the first character in the book, for book 1, to actually show respect to Don Quixote. So it just creates this very strange thing. And also it's like, it's this book that I'm not interested in. I'm not going to reread. I was kind of bored through the novel, to be honest. But the amount of referentiality and intertextuality within this singular novel is amazing. And there's so much different stuff that you can reference, and you can use this as a device in writing to add that layer of intertextuality to your own work as well. So through that, I can see why this novel is very important. However, like I said, the episodic part, and I talked to everybody who reads about this too, and he agrees, books like this, back in the day, books are probably super expensive. So when you got a book, you wanted that to last. And also, it's probably like a more oral format where the parents read it out loud. So you have this book or 2 books, you're not going to do what I do and go on Amazon and buy all these books. This is your movies, this is your TV, this is your source of entertainment every night. So you want this to last. And you don't necessarily want it to be a continuous story because, like, hey, we've been reading this for 3 months. I forgot what happened in the first month. And people are gonna lose track of that. Meaning, that's the biggest barrier to entry in that it doesn't connect, and it is a product of its time in a sense, not so much because of the content, even though the content is really based on the time period, but more so in that this is not meant to be read in one sitting. This is meant to be read over a year. If you approach the novel like that, you might enjoy it more, but if you just want to get through it and go on to something else and don't want to be continually reading it all the way through, unless you really enjoy the humor, you're not going to be too happy. What are some other scenes from this book? I don't remember. It's not that difficult of a book to read, to be honest. If you're kind of associated with the classics like Brothers Karamazov and stuff like that, you'll be fine. The only really tough part is when he goes into lectures about chivalry and what it means to be a knight and whatnot. He kind of lost me there. I was like, it was this combination of like I didn't care and I wasn't too interested. and I'm like, wait, what is he getting at? Oh, whatever. So it was a little over my head, but for the most part, it's a pretty easy read if you're like an intermediate reader. So the only other cool thing I can say is that it has some badass pictures in this book. Look at that lithograph. But yeah, let me know what you think of Don Quixote. Do you agree with me? Did you like this book? I know the book chemist loved Don Quixote. He said he read it in 2 weeks. Did you find it funny? Do you agree with my assertions about it? And if you liked it, let me know why you liked it. I think it's one of those things where I hear people talk about with comedies, like you either find it funny or you don't. So again, if you find this book funny, give it a read. I think there's a lot to pick at. If you don't find it funny, don't read it. Go to other stuff. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Don Quixote. I'd like to hear what your experience is on. How long did it take you to read it? There was one day. Speaking of the fried brain stuff, well, I read 170 pages of this in one day. I still thought that was slow. But I went to the gas station to get some food, and somebody talked to me, and I'm like, oh my god, my brain is fried. So I just had that weird experience where Don Quixote had, where reading fried his brain. This actually fried my brain. And I'm telling you, man, it's just like great references to novels to come as well. It's kind of insane.
Next and final stop, Oceanside Transit Centre.